My country is one of the 15 most water-scarce countries in the world, and it therefore means that we have to find all of the possible ways that we can to augment our groundwater. At the same time, Hurricane Beryl hit us at the beginning of July, not with the ferocious human tragedy that it gave to Carriacou and Union Island and Mairo, but in our case, it decimated our fishing industry. 90% of our fishing industry was destroyed, and most of our coastal infrastructure was damaged in some manner or form. I speak to these things because it is important to understand context, and it is important for you to understand that when we talk about innovating finance in a crisis, that this is where the rubber hits the road. We need longer-term capital in the region, across the world, in small island states especially, if we are going to be able to meet our date with destiny, which is to build resilience. I repeat that for every dollar we spend in building resilience, we save $5 to $7 in damage, not to count also the fact that we may lose lives in those natural disasters, and we've not found a way to give back life to anybody. So that the urgency with which we speak about the need for greater speed and greater scope is absolutely critical, and we need as many people to keep their voices up in this matter. The private sector financing has to be scaled up, but we all know the problem that with respect to investment in the global south, there are multiple reasons why people can find why they may not want to invest. And one of those may relate to foreign exchange issues, currency hedges. Some may relate to the fact of lack of available data. And in many instances, there is simply just not a familiarity with the country or the people. We have to overcome these hurdles, because the truth is that there is a potential win-win in terms of financing for everyone. But even as we do it, we need to see how best we can scale up domestic resource mobilization to ensure that when investments are made to build adaptation or for mitigation, that the people who stand to be affected in the countries are not left out of it. Can any of them probably invest on their own, or even collectively on our own within our countries, on all of the projects that are needed? Probably not. But to exclude our own people's savings from the investments that have to be made will be to make our own people tenants in their own country, having attained independence. And that is simply not on the cards. So we need to innovate with respect to how we use public and private funds, and we need to innovate also with respect to understanding that the big jump that is needed now is a recognition that without some form of global levies, we are unlikely to bridge the gap. Whether we like it or not, most of the G7 countries are in some kind of fiscal restructuring, turbulence, anxiety, call it what you want. It therefore means that the level of public money is unlikely to be there in the scales that we need. Yes, we need to leverage the balance sheets better, all of that. But even when we do all of that, there is still a gap. And this is where we need a mental reset, recognizing that if we have the large number of multinational corporations with balance sheets that dwarf the majority of the countries of the world's balance sheets, then we need to be able to work out how can we get them to play their part so that we can sustain global public goods. Whether it is speaking to oil and gas companies who have helped to contribute to the problem, or whether it is speaking to renewable energy companies where their rates of return may be excessive beyond what might otherwise be normal, and I'm not suggesting that that is the case in every instance. But the principle is that those who contribute to the problem or those who stand to benefit egregiously from the solution, both of you, please put 2, 3, 5 cents, 1 cent on the board out of every dollar. Why? Because that is a form of sustainable funding that is needed at this point in time to guarantee that when countries and companies start to make the clean transition, that there is a pipeline of funding that is secure. And we're not limiting this to climate alone, by the way. The world has a number of global challenges. And if we are to sustain a strong global commons, if we are to ensure that small countries do not put at risk the well-being of the planet, then we need to make sure that we are in a position to provide and secure those global commons, both against the issues in the climate crisis and in particular food and water insecurity, because when all is said and done, you can't go without food and water for a very long period, so the bureaucracy can't be keeping you spinning if you want to save lives. Secondly, against the next pandemic, and not just the traditional ones, but also what I call the slow motion silent pandemic. And on Thursday this week, the heads of government of the world and heads of state will meet to be able to come with new declarations on antimicrobial resistance, because it is the third largest killer of people across the earth, simply because our bodies, when infected, cannot and are not receiving the same benefits from antibiotics as they previously did. Thirdly, I don't need to tell you about the consequences of war. There's too much of it across the world. And it's not just traditional war, but it is the conflict that takes place in the urban and national environment, like here in the Americas, where there is not a military theater for war, but where there is in fact the level of homicides that are destabilizing the functioning of societies. And then, of course, there is the problem of the digital divide and the question as to whether AI will be regulated sufficient such as not to create a threat for human civilization. These 5 things constitute the core of what a global commons needs to be protected for, to ensure that none of these issues can decimate global progress and, more importantly, civilizations within the global community. If we are serious about innovating financing, then while we have made progress in the areas that I started out at the beginning, it is my view that 80 years on, it is time for a serious global reset. And the World Bank ought to be the place where the global public commons is preserved. And the World Bank ought to be the entity that is capable of collecting levies, cesses, whatever you want, from oil and gas companies, from shipping. There's $7 trillion in value every year in shipping. If you put a 1% cess on that, not to refinance or to cause the owners to turn their ships into green and more sustainable vessels, but for the benefit of adaptation and climate financing, which it is causing us problems with, if we were to put that 1% cess, it would earn us $70 billion minimum a year, and possibly rising based on the increases as we go forward. That is a sustainable form of financing, instead of us arguing, where is the $100 billion that was promised in Denmark? We need to think outside of the box, and we need to create new mechanisms. What is going to be the fundamental issue? That many of these companies operate cross-border, and therefore there will be the issue of capacity to collect. Some may say that if governments collect, they won't pass over the money. Maybe true. So do we use the international entities like the International Maritime Organization, like IATA and ICAO, like the international entities to help us collect these funds in trust for World Bank to be able to hold? I believe that that is the beginning of the new direction. Do we have it all fleshed out? Not yet. But do we need to force the issue and to start the research in this direction? Absolutely. Because if we don't, we're going to have a declining pie being forced to cater to ever-expanding challenges and crises across the world. And if we doubted it, 5 years ago, we were not contemplating that war would be at the center of all that we are dealing with. And the distractions of war and populism and elections, regrettably, may seem an acceptable excuse for those who want to use it, but it didn't stop the world from hitting the hottest day ever on July 22nd. We are in the midst of multiple crises, and the last time I checked, human beings throughout history have had the capacity and the ingenuity to make major changes. Nobody believed that slavery would be abolished until it happened. Nobody believed that women would have the right to vote until it happened. Nobody believed that apartheid would go until it happened. And as Chelsea reminded me, Even when we were trying to deal with acid rain and hydrocarbons, it was dealt with under President Reagan with the Montreal Agreement and others, and look where we are in terms of success on those fronts today. We need to do what Nike taught us. Just do it.